Welcome back, Mando.
Ho ho. Greetings, Bucketheads. Mayvar Tagar. Welcome to our 358th wondrously walking the world between worlds episode of MandoVision. I am your host, Nargai Tom, and thank you so much for checking out this small, independent Star Wars podcast. We are so glad you're here. Reach out to us on the socials at Mando_Vision on X and Insta. You can find me at MandoVision on Blue Sky, and of course you can email the show, MandoVisionTom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. All right, Bucketheads, we are here for a fairly important episode of Star Wars Rebels and our rewatch. Again, we're down to the final three at this point, so we are blazing towards that finish line. And today we are here with one of the biggest. And I have to admit, remembering when I first watched this episode when it debuted, I was sort of thrown by the idea that we were going to get to something that was sort of high concept for Star Wars. You know, Star Wars didn't really delve into, for lack of a better word, an overly simplistic explanation for what I'm about to say is time travel things. But I don't see why not. Like, looking back at it, kind of thinking about it over the years, yeah, it makes a certain amount of sense, especially as we get into like the idea of the connectedness of the Force. Like, why wouldn't it connect things in sort of a non-linear fashion, in sort of a everything everywhere all at once kind of aspect? The world between worlds is still somewhat undefined and somewhat of a nebulous concept because we really haven't dived into its nature. At this point, this is one of the most. This to this point, this episode is sort of our the linchpin of our understanding of it is all right here. Yes, of course, it returned in the Ahsoka live action show, but in a very different fashion than what we saw it in this episode. And then if we go back to season 2 of Rebels, it would appear that we saw an aspect of the world between worlds when Ezra communed with Master Yoda across great distances of time and space. So it's a bridge in many, many senses, and when we see on the show, we see actual bridges within this plane of existence. We're going to talk about a lot of these things as much as we can. Again, it's going to be something of a challenging episode in the sense that I can only really talk about the aspects of it that I feel confident in. There's a lot of speculation on aspects of the world between worlds, but we're going to do our best to talk about all of it, lay it out there, and put as much information in your hands as possible. So I think it's important that we go ahead and get into our episode particulars. This is Star Wars Rebels Season 4, Episode 13, A World Between Worlds. Original air date, February 26th, 2018. The plot for this week. While the other rebels engage the Imperial forces outside the Jedi Temple, Ezra gains access inside and experiences a stunning revelation. The episode is directed by Dave Filoni and Stuart Lee. It is written by, can you guess? Dave Filoni. Stephen Melching is doing the story editing, of course. And our primary voice cast for this week. Now, listen, there are a lot of there are a lot of voices in this episode. We're not going to read them all because I don't believe they were actively involved in the recording of this show. So bear with me as I read through the normal voice cast that was actually in a studio and didn't just have their voices lifted. All right, we have Taylor Gray as Ezra Bridger, Vanessa Marshall as Harrison Dula, Freddie Prinze Jr. as Kanan Jarrus, Tia Sakar as Sabine Wren, Steve Blum as Zeb Aurelios, Dave Filoni as Chopper, Ashley Eckstein as Ahsoka Tano, Ian McDiarmid is Emperor Palpatine, Malcolm McDowell returns as Minister Hayden. Hayden Christensen. Oh, nope. This is what I was trying to avoid. These are all the voices that are just sort of in the show. Let me scroll. And we get all the Ben Kenobis. We get Stephen Stanton Ben Kenobi. We get James Arnold Taylor Ben Kenobi. Adrian Wilkinson as the daughter. Sam Witwer as the son. Again, we'll just stop there. We'll just stop there, friends, because I just want to, we'll talk about it. All right, let's go ahead and get into the episode. This one's gonna be wild. You know what that means? It's time. Strap on your buckets. Let's go.
Get out of here. We'll hold them off.
You're going to have to relocate the covert.
This is the way.
This is the way.
So this episode has like three distinct sections to it, right? We have what's going on outside of the temple, outside of the world between worlds. And that would be, and there's two parts to that. There is Chopper and Hera and Zeb and their efforts to free Sabine Wren, who's been captured by Minister Hayden and sort of being, they don't know what's happening to her, but she's being questioned at the very, very least. So their efforts to liberate their friend and then ultimately get to Ezra and to stop what the Empire is doing here. All right, as we established last week, now that they know that this is something that Emperor Palpatine is very interested in, there is a level of importance here, and they seem to understand that. I very much like this aspect of the story. Again, it's simple, not a lot to it. It's Zeb and Hera and Chopper kind of doing what they do best, which is cause mayhem and destruction and the necessary distraction to help save Sabine. I really like the whole part of accessing these mobile command units that are sort of housing the archaeology expedition, and activating the boosters to kind of flip it over, very, very gradually, go from the ground to up in the air, straight up, and then all the way over. I thought that was a very cool distraction. Liked it quite a bit, and made for the sort of like the perfect way for Sabine to escape from her captor. Now, I do want to spend some time talking about Sabine's time as Minister Hayden's guest, and because it is probably different than I think a lot of us thought it would go. Minister Hayden himself confirms that, yes, he is basically a lackey of the Emperor, and he's quite okay with that. But his approach to interrogation, his approach to getting information from Sabine is very, very different than, say, someone like Governor Price. Again, Governor Price is something of a crazy person, sociopath. The way she has Hera strung up and given her shocks, and she hasn't even asked her any questions yet. A person who sort of like takes glee in hurting her enemies. That's who Arenda Price is. Minister Hayden, on the other hand, tries to be cordial with Sabine, tries to develop a rapport, plead to her as an artist to help him interpret. He knows he himself is not an artist. He in fact refers to himself as something of a critic of art, which I thought was an interesting choice of words for him to use to describe himself. But nonetheless, I guess that way you get the critic versus artist sort of dynamic between the two. Sabine, not super interested in being helpful. And in fact, on more than one occasion, she rubs his nose in the fact that she solved the mural before him because she is smarter than him. And she mentions that several times throughout the episode. And to his credit, Minister Hayden seems to take that in stride, I suppose. But again, he is trying to gently coax information out of Sabine. Now, at some point, this doesn't go the way he wants it to, and he has to bring in some death troopers to stand there with their weapons, poised and ready to go. But eventually they do achieve something of a dialogue here because Minister Hayden shows Sabine something that she hadn't yet considered. And it's an interesting back and forth. So Sabine gets the information, in an interesting way, because Sabine cracks the code that the daughter is the key to opening it, but it's Minister Hayden who sort of shows that it's going to be the son that will be the opposite of that. The fact that they're sort of Force archetypes throughout the history of the Jedi Knights. So these characters have resonance, right? And we didn't talk about it as much last episode, but the placement of the hands, the way the daughter's hand is in placement on the mural to what Ezra has to do to activate the mural, right? So the daughter's hand is open, and that's how Ezra places his hand on top of hers in the mural. Meanwhile, and then at the end of the episode, when it's time to activate the sun, Ezra has to have the closed fist like the sun has in there. So there's a lot of interesting pieces of sort of like art interpretation. And again, I like the back and forth between these two characters. We don't get a lot of depth from Minister Hayden. We don't really know who he is and how he got here, but he is just overtly a lackey of Palpatine. Is it so that he can access rare and undiscovered pieces of art from secret societies like the Jedi? Perhaps, but again, we're just inferring at this point. We have no base of reference to make that determination. But again, I found the sequence between these two characters interesting. Eventually, Sabine will escape, return with her friends, get out of there, and Minister Hayden will suffer a sort of not great death, because we see him in the background as the temple is going down, and him just sort of falling in after it. It's again, we just see it in the background. There's no focus on it. There's just light coming from the ground. He falls into that light. Not a lot of notoriety on that passing for Mr. Malcolm McDowell. Sir Malcolm? Nah, maybe just Malcolm McDowell. Any hoot. Let's get into the real crux of this episode, the real thing that we have to talk about, which is the world between worlds itself. And this is where Ezra finds himself after he's jumped through the gateway of the Lothwolves running in a circle in the side of the rock of the Jedi Temple. And he's breached another plane. And it's a very cool spacescape with these like light bridges and portals and gateways on it, with symbols around them to sort of like indicate where they are, where they go even. So the Lothwolves are around the gate that Ezra accessed, so we know that that gate is his. And Ezra doesn't know where he is. He's exploring, he's walking around, and as he's walking around, we're hearing familiar voices from throughout the Star Wars timeline. We have young Obi-Wan, old Obi-Wan. We have characters from Rogue One. We have characters from the sequel trilogy. We have characters from the prequel trilogy. And it's all extremely well done. Very, very fascinating. As Ezra is, again, surrounded by the spacescape, and he's walking on these bridges that are really only illuminated on the edges. And as he steps, there's like sort of like these ripples around his feet. And we've seen this brought to live action in the Ahsoka show as well. But we get to a gateway, we get to a portal. Ezra's sort of trying to figure things out, doesn't really have an idea of where he is and what's going on, until he peers through one of these portals and he finds himself witnessing the battle between Darth Vader and Ahsoka Tano in the Sith Temple on Malachor. The end of Season 2, our Season 2 finale, which we now get to look at through a different lens, because we leave that fight in the Season 2 finale. Ezra and Kanan and everyone is leaving the temple. It's Anakin / Vader squaring off against Ahsoka Tano, Twilight of the Apprentice, and the chamber seals with them still fighting. And then at the end of the episode, we see Vader limping away in one direction, and we see the back of Ahsoka Tano descending down stairs of the temple, and that's it. We don't really know anything more than that, and we haven't seen Ahsoka since then. We didn't see Ahsoka for all of Season 3. We didn't see Ahsoka up until this point. So Ezra's watching this battle, and he can't quite control himself, has a little bit of impulse control, so that when it looks like Vader is about to land the killing blow, Ezra reaches his hand through the portal and pulls Ahsoka into the world between worlds with him, thus saving her life and sparing her from what seemed to be certain death. Now we get to have this adventure with Ahsoka here in the world between worlds, but Ahsoka knows she has to go back to that moment. Ahsoka's already more attuned to the fact that she's just cheated something, but can't outmaneuver it forever. It's sort of an example of a closed loop, right? So because the chamber's closed in that Twilight of the Apprentice episode, we don't know what happened. So this is what's supposed to happen. This is that moment, and it'll become a little bit more clear as we get to the end of this episode. But trust me, it does all make a certain amount of sense. But now Ezra believes that he can change things. He doesn't realize that he's just fulfilling what he was supposed to do in the first place. Not yet, at least. He believes he can change things. So, of course, his instinct, his impulse is to find the gateway, find the portal that he needs so that he can go and save Kanan Jarrus. Ahsoka immediately knows this is a bad idea. Again, Ahsoka seems to have her head around what's just happened a bit better than Ezra does, who, again, he's still young. He is emotional and prone to impulse control issues. So we go to the gateway and we witness Kanan's final moments, and Ezra believing that he can reach him, he can get him, he can save him. And Ahsoka has to tell him, has to remind him, has to point out to him that, hey, Kanan gave his life so that you all could live. If you take him away from this, then you all die. So it's something of a fixed point, right? Like, I don't want to get too much into like Doctor Who time travel stuff, but that's sort of like a fixed event, right? There's no going back from that. If he were to change that, he would wipe himself out of existence, which is why closed loop time theories are way more fun because they're paradox free. So what that means is basically Ezra can only do what Ezra's going to do. He was always going to pull Ahsoka through the portal, and Ahsoka was always going to go back through it, which is what we get to at the end of this episode. And what that really just means is nothing can change because it was what happened already. It was what was supposed to happen. There is no changing of anything, which I know infuriates a good number of Star Wars fan websites that want to believe that you can use the world between worlds to wipe out the sequel trilogy. Listen, I got my problems with the sequel trilogy as well, but I don't think Star Wars would be best served with alternate timelines and things like this. I don't want Star Wars to go down that rabbit hole. We don't need a Kelvin timeline for Star Wars. And it doesn't seem like Star Wars wants to do that anyways. They seem very much happy to just keep mining the same familiar territory over and over and over again. But that's a conversation for another day. All right, where things get interesting, of course, is that we know now, we know from what was said last episode, this is the realm that Palpatine has been looking for. This is what the Emperor has wanted all along. Palpatine believes that if he can gain access to the world between worlds, he will control all of time and space. And maybe he will. Maybe he'll have a different way to influence it. He'll corrupt it in some fashion, is my guess. Now, he's not 100% able to access the world between worlds physically, but using what I can only imagine is some version of Dark Force magic and Night Sister magic, he is able to locate Ezra Bridger. Again, the gateway's open, so I assume that means someone as powerful in the Force as Palpatine can still find him in the Force, and so he's trying to bring Ezra through. He's using like this blue flamey magic stuff. Again, kind of reminiscent of what we've seen from the Night Sisters, just a different color. To pursue Ahsoka Tano, to pursue Ezra Bridger, because my assumption is that if he can pull them through, that means he then himself can go through. Now, we do see his hand come through at one point, but maybe he's not powerful enough to go all the way through, since he doesn't actually have a portal. But if he can pull them through, maybe that opens a gateway that he can then use for himself. I'm not entirely sure on that theory, but go with me on it. Work with me here. All right, so this is all a bad sign. This is what causes our heroes to split off from each other. Ezra's going to go back to where he needs to go, to the gateway on Lothal, and Ahsoka's going to go back to where she needs to go. Before they part, Ezra does say, when you get back, come and find me. All right, so that's kind of where we leave things, right? Ezra goes through because he has to close the portal. He knows he has to be able to close it, or else Palpatine's going to be able to gain access to it. And Ahsoka goes back to where she's supposed to be to finish up her battle with Vader. Now, again, Ezra pulled her out just in time to avoid the killing blow from Vader, but she's going to go back right about at the same time. And this is where things get a little confusing. So, like, does Ezra really save her if she's going back to the exact same moment? Or did he give her just enough of a chance to then survive this battle? Because, again, at the end of Twilight of the Apprentice, we do see Ahsoka Tano descending downstairs at this temple on Malachor. And that's what we see at the end of this episode too, the same shot. And I neglected to mention that Morai is in the World Between Worlds. That's sort of what alerts Ezra to the gateway that he needs to find Ahsoka in. So obviously the daughter / Morai has something to do here and is guiding Ezra to sort of fulfill what he has to do. Again, closed loop. Ezra had done this, so now he just needed to do the act. And Morai is there to sort of guide him, without him even knowing it, to do the thing that he's going to do. So, after that's all done, again, in this episode, we get the same shot as the end of Twilight of the Apprentice, which is Ahsoka descending down the stairs, Morai flying after her. And then Ahsoka has to do what she has to do, right? She has to lay low and hide out for the next X amount of time to catch up in the timeline. She can't go to Ezra sooner. Not that she could anyways, because, again, she's on Malachor, which probably took some time to get off of, if you can imagine. I don't think there's just a lot of ships laying around on Malachor. She probably had to bide her time to get out of there. But this is the confirmation people have been needing that Ahsoka is alive. Meanwhile, Ezra goes back. He gets to where he needs to go and realizes he has to close the gate. This is where the information that Sabine has gotten will aid him in closing the portal. The fist of the brother communing with that piece of the mural on the stone. And then again, more of that sweet 2D on 3D art. And yeah, we do it. We close the portal, and the temple sinks into the surface of Lothal. This is when Minister Haydn perishes. And we find out later that, the entire Jedi Temple is now gone. Is it beneath the surface? It would appear to be, because it was descending. Or has it sort of like shifted off this plane in a way? It's a little hard to tell. It's a little vague at this point. I wish I had a better answer for you than that. My assumption is that it's gone below the surface, and the planet's surface itself is sort of like reformed around where it used to be. But there's a lot about the Jedi Temple on Lothal that we do not know. But that is essentially where we end this episode. Hera and Ezra, perplexed at the seal that's on the ground where the temple was. They had a harrowing getaway, by the way. Again, another great job by Chopper. Another great job by Hera and Zeb getting everybody out. Great episode. It's a really strong episode. I like it a lot. Again, it's another one of those aspects of Star Wars that we just don't have a lot of information for. It would be really cool to have more knowledge on what the World Between Worlds is, how it functions, what can people do with it if they were to gain control of it. Again, Palpatine believes he would have had control over all of time and space. Is that true? Who's to say? At least he thinks he would have. 9 buckets. Great episode of the show. And I think we're going to reference back to this at a certain point because, again, it's too big an episode to ignore. And again, we'll be getting ready for season 2 of Ahsoka, and I imagine the World Between Worlds will also function there as well, perhaps as a way for them to return to the galaxy that they're now estranged from. Finding a point I've already forgotten the name of that planet that Ahsoka is stranded on. But perhaps she finds her way back via the world between worlds. That makes a certain amount of sense. But I guess we'll wait and see. All right, Bucketheads. Whew, like I said, 9 buckets for this episode. And we'll get out of here and get back to you next week for the final 2 episodes of our Star Wars Rebels rewatch. Go out there, be great Star Wars fans, kind, supportive, respectful, understanding, tolerant, patient, and awesome. And make sure you're following us on the socials at Mando_Vision on X and Insta, MandoVision at Blue Sky, and you can email me, MandoVisionTom@gmail.com. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. If possible or so inclined, sweet, sweet, sweet 5-star reviews. They help us out immensely, and make sure that we don't get lost in the intergalactic podcast shuffle. All right, Bucketheads. Again, we'll be back next week. 2 more episodes to close out this show. But in the meantime, remember, this podcast can only end one way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way. You expect me to search the galaxy for the home of this creature and deliver it to a race of enemy sorcerers?
This is the way.
I would like to see the baby.
Admiral, we have enemy ships in Sector 47.
It's a trap!